At some point over the past 3 years since the hole for the prop shaft was bored out dead straight, it has become ever so slightly less straight. And before the engine can be aligned to the prop shaft, that will have to change. Thanks for subscribing and following along with the channel, and we hope you can consider becoming a $5 a month supporter on Patreon as well to help us in the final push to get Arabella ready for the water this summer. Details in the description below.
Today is an abnormally warm day, and we may get more of these, we may not, but we must take advantage. So I'm going to put some of this hard anti-fouling paint where we did the mortise, the rebates here for the rudder hardware, now that that's all carved out. And I'm waiting for a couple things for this. I've been a little preoccupied and scatterbrained the last little bit with everything going on. So I'm kind of behind the 8 ball with getting things ordered. I'm usually pretty good about that. But we're waiting for a nut and washer for this piece of hardware up here. And we're waiting on some copper flashing that's gonna wrap part of the stern post here by the rudder. And we'll get into that and why later. All I'll say at this point is I'm borrowing a play out of Larry Parday's playbook. So if you have Larry Parday's book, you can kind of figure out what I'm talking about. But that'll be much easier to show than to tell, so we'll get there. But just know that we're still chugging away on the rudder, just waiting on a couple pieces here. And this warm day is going to help a lot with being able to get this painted. This is my favorite kind of painting, the kind where it doesn't matter. So this all still got to get cleaned up and fared down a little bit, so there's no worries about being messy. Just want to make sure we get some anti-fouling paint underneath where this hardware is going to be. This is the fitting that goes on the stern post, and this is our bearing that goes inside of it. So you can see this is rubber, and there's grooves to let the water in. But since this is old, this is kind of a loose fit. So what we're going to do is give this a rough up. What I do is not remove really any material, just scuff it up, get the corrosion off it. And I really want to do that just in the last inch here. So we've cleaned off the corrosion. Wipe down with acetone. And get out our friend here, Fixo Fast Cure. So what we're going to do, we're going to epoxy on the inside, just on the very edge here. And that will lock the bearing in there, make sure it doesn't spin or come out or do anything funky. We're not going to cover the whole thing in epoxy. We're just going to do the last little bit, just enough to hold it there and make sure it doesn't run away. Alright, so that is hammered in there. It kind of fetched up a little bit towards the end, but I still don't think it's quite a tight enough fit to hold it there on its own. When we need to take this out, it'll be really easy to take a heat gun. We're not even going to need a torch, just an electric heat gun. We'll warm up the end of this bearing. That'll break the bond with the epoxy, and we'll be able to pull that out of there. So it's time to take good old Scotch-Brite pads here and give the paint a good scuff and get, you know, there's dust and stuff in here. It's not a perfect painting environment, so we get these little bumps and just kind of knock them back, scuff the paint up a little bit. There are definitely some imperfections throughout the housetop. There's going to be a deck box here for some deck gear and a propane tank. There's door raid boxes to go on the housetop. There's the hatches, and then sections like here on the deck, or on the housetop rather, where you're going to walk when you furl the mainsail or unfurl it. We're going to put non-skid paint. So any little bit of discrepancy in texture, any tiny divots you see in there are just going to disappear when that non-skid paint goes on. You'll never see them. So we're getting the paint to where it looks now, where it's pretty decent. We're going to add a couple more coats, and then we're going to get all of the deck hardware and features and accoutrement put on there. And then at that point, we'll take a good look at it and see if there's anything that is really going to, you know, look poor and bother me down the road. And at that point, we'll fix whatever tiny little spots they are. But we didn't really feel like it was worth making ourselves crazy with places that are just going to get covered up anyways or have non-skid paint put on them. I guess we'll get to getting. So we've got a few coats of paint on the house. We're having a really hard time in this weather getting the paint to cure. It takes like 3 or 4 days to do a coat of paint. And then you have an entire day where this is just filled with fumes in here and you can't really be inside the boat. So it's been pretty hampering. I'm going through and fitting all of the trim here for the hatch in the house, for the skylight, and I'm working on the trim for the forehatch as well. It's all going to be done in cherry. Once these are all fit, I'll do the sanding and the varnishing all at the same time, and we can do the install all at the same time. It's kind of nice working on all little pieces. So this forward one is pretty much done. I've got to sand and varnish, but the cutting and the fitting is finished. So one of my friends from the climbing gym back in the day, Glenn, he and his fiancee, Sarah, stopped by, and they started making these corner pieces that go on. And this is our acrylic here. So that's 3/8 UV and scratch resistant acrylic, and some cherry trim on the inside. And the cherry trim is covering up the junction between the housetop beams that are varnished locust and the painted cedar that makes up the housetop. So I gotta get this cherry all sanded and finished. And I'm sure some of you have already noticed and are going to point out that when this cherry trim goes on here, this is going to create a very effective water trap. And we are going to have standing water on top of here. And we need to put the tender over the house, and the center board lands here. So we need to keep this as low as we can. So peaking it isn't really an option. We need to keep it really low. I really want the light in the boat. So the solution to this is let it be a water trap and make sure it's sealed up really well, and that these pieces are very easy to replace. So if this is all sealed down really well, we shouldn't get any water into the boat. And as long as these come off easy and it's easy to rebed, it's not really a big deal. So say in 10 years, when the varnished cherry starts to rot, you take out a handful of screws, use these as patterns, whip up some new ones, put them back on there, and you're back in business. So as long as we set this up to be really easy maintenance and really easy fix, the water trap here shouldn't be too much of an issue. And if it does become a huge issue, we'll do something different with it and figure out something a little different down the road. It has something that I've thought about, it being a water trap, and I'm aware that that's going to happen, but we'll see how it goes. And this one is going to be taller because it goes into the center of the dinghy. The rear seat lands right back here. The center board lands right up here. So this can be a little bit taller. So this will have a slope top on it, and it'll be a butterfly hatch. So opening the entirety of this hatch will be something that you don't do very often. It's really going to be opening and closing those butterflies for ventilation. So I'm comfortable with leaving this trim pretty thin. It means that it's not the strongest, but this isn't a hatch that's going to be opened a ton and have things constantly coming in and out of it like the fore hatches. So I'm okay with that. And what we have going on here is just a real thin piece of cherry, 45s at the corners. Those are going to go on like that. These fore and aft ones still need to be scribed down and fit. And you'll notice that this creates a channel here, and that's going to be part of the seal for the hatch. So if, a big wave were to hit the housetop here, which would have to be a really big wave, it would come up and want to go across here, and it would land in this chasm, and then it would have another wall to climb. So when the hatch gets built, it'll have a piece that sits down over this with a piece of weather stripping on it. And this will be defense number 1, and this will be defense number 2. And if you look at the corner here, you'll notice that it's rounded over. And when this trim goes on, it creates a hole that comes down. We're going to knock off the very corner down here, and that way this channel will have a place to drain. So if we do get water that gets into here, it will be able to go to one of the 4 corners and make its way out. And those holes are small enough that if any water does get pushed up and into it, shouldn't be enough to breach this barrier and come into the boat. So this is something that I've seen in a bunch of books. Bud McIntosh talks about doing hatches, not as glued on trim like this, but routing out a section down the middle and creating kind of the same chasm to help keep that water from coming in. See about sliding this on. Hello? Yep. Yeah, the sawmill could cut 20 feet, so I tried to cut most of the logs as close to that as reasonably made sense. So everything's somewhere between 16 and 20. Most of them are like 19 plus. Selling off my oak. Okay.
All right. We do not have concentricity with the Delrin. It's hitting hard on that side and you have quite a bit of loose on the other side. If you push it over there, you can get it to start in there. But that's it. It won't. You can't push it in there.
Yeah.
It's hitting on the top, and it's hitting up here, this quadrant.
So we gotta open this hole up a little bit and let
Let it go where it wants to
it
go.
go where it wants.
Yes. The only other option would be take the Delrin out.
That was what I was gonna say. Does it make sense to take the Delrin out and put in make that more oversized? We still need a liner, so we would have to machine
we'd have to bore the
something for
Delrin
it.
out.
Yeah. Whew, 2023 is kicking my keister so far. So Joe and I went to go put the fittings on and put the shaft through, and things aren't quite lining up. They're very close, but this is a game of super tight tolerances. So there is a rubber bushing bearing surface in either end of these bronze fittings. And then this is the Delrin sleeve that we machined for the liner for the timber and the stern post. And what's happening is we can put the shaft quite a way through and then we get caught up a little bit. So it's ever so slightly off. And our solution to this is what you got there, Joe?
This is the shaft. And this is the cutting tool. And we are going to bore that hole bigger and put in a bigger plastic shield, and we'll get it more or less where we want it. Okay, this bushing is going to ride in the old bore. Now this bushing is going to keep this end of the shaft where it belongs, and it'll go around and round in here. This one is going to go to the other end to catch that end of the tool when it comes out. Oh yeah. We need a gun swab like they use in the cannons.
It'll go. I don't know, probably in almost a foot.
Is that tape measure?
So I think we just assemble the old tube and fittings and measure that from fitting to fitting.
Okay.
So what do we got here?
Height 17.
16 and 7/8.
16 and 15 sixteenths.
Yeah. 16 and 15 sixteenths.
Yep, you're right up to the bushing.
How's that look?
Better. I think you got it. You got a hammer?
Yep. I like it. I like it that it's tight. Yeah. Joe, you're real good at measuring stuff.
You already plugged the holes for the screw holes, right?
Oh, I haven't drilled them yet.
Oh,
Good old Dolphin Marine product here, aka Dolphinite. And this is what I love about the bit and brace.
yeah.
You can
You
put
can
tons of
just
pressure behind
squeeze
it
it.
and
Yeah.
just quarter turn.
Yeah.
Sweet. All right, should we slide a shaft in?
Sure.
There we go.
Yep.
It's all the way through. So now we have the shaft in here. There's not much resistance on it at all. And I've got to get this inner bearing to fit really tightly to that. So what this block is doing is registering the shaft. So I pulled it all the way up to the motor and I lifted the shaft as high as it could go. I pushed it down as far as it could go, just with moderate pressure, no He-Man on it, just giving light pressure on the shaft. And then I moved it to port and starboard as far as it would go. Marked those measurements, got those measurements, and then built this block. So this is sitting directly halfway between its highest and its lowest, and directly halfway between its farthest to port and starboard, which should mean that I'm centered really well in the other bearing. So I slid the fitting up to the stern post, and what I found out was that the angle is a little off, so I needed just under 1/4 of an inch at the bottom and basically nothing at the top. So I could go through and attack the stern post here with a myriad of hand tools and try to shave that down. But I have to keep this really nice and flat, and I have to keep all of those angles the same. And when I put in the 4 bolts and torque them down, I need to make sure that that also doesn't shift or move the plate at all. So what might seem like a great fit, sliding it up there, once you add the pressure of those bolts, might not be a great fit. So what I decided I thought would be better is I made up a shim and I very ugly hot glued it to the plate. So there's no glue between the faces of the shim and the plate. Plate's all covered in tape and it's all hot glued along the outside so that we can peel it off and take it apart. And what I'm going to do is put some thickened epoxy behind there, slide that shim up, and make sure that this is moving nice and freely. Let that dry. And then I'll be able to drill the holes, and when I drill the holes, this plate won't move because the plate is hot glued to the shim, and the shim will then be epoxied to the stern post. So I've got to plug these holes, glue this on, then once the glue's kicked, I'll be able to drill these 4 holes out again because the angle changes a little bit, and put the bolts in without having that plate move whatsoever. So one of my concerns is I can have this plate in place, but there's nothing to really clamp to. I can't get a clamp around here. I could put a block on here and but it would be tough. And just the fact of putting the drill in there and drilling against the oak is going to cause that to move just ever so slightly. And the tolerances on this are pretty tight. Well, our epoxy is kicked. I put the heater on it for an entire day, turned the heater off overnight, and ran the heater for another entire day while I worked on other stuff. I wanted to make sure that this was fully cured. And I put these lags back in. So I've got the drill set with a very high-tech tape stop, and we want to drill full diameter here for that depth down so we get the threads. And then I've got a thinner drill bit, which is the root diameter, so the solid metal part between all of those little teeth. And this one, we're going to drill full depth, take the plate out, and drill even deeper, because the drill bit's not quite long enough to go full depth and have it chucked in the drill. Alright, we'll peel off all that hot glue and see if we can separate the plate. There it goes. Oh boy, moment of truth. Let's see how it looks. I'll clean up this epoxy a little bit. But that's great. Squeeze out, and we got squeeze out all around the other sides. Mm-hmm. So I don't think that shim's going anywhere. Good. And this was a really nice tight fit between the plate and the shim. Yep. So I'm optimistic that when we tighten this down, we'll be there.
Clean it up, slap it on there.
Yeah. So this shaft is lubricated by water, which is in that liner and in the fitting, and we need to stop that water from somehow coming into the boat. And we're going to use a packing gland. So this rubber end gets put on there with the hose clamps and tightened up, and that gives this a little bit of flex when the shaft starts, goes forward, goes reverse, stops, and it helps keep everything in line. Just a little bit of give there. And then on this end, you have a big nut, a little nut, and you put packing material in here, and we'll get to that later. And you tighten those nuts up, and that squishes it around the shaft. And it's supposed to drip just a little bit, not enough to cause any issues, enough to give a bilge pump something to do every couple days, but that is how they work. So let's slide this on here, since this is all part of the puzzle. Now these aren't totally tightened up, but that will hold everything in its place for now. Oh, I so needed this win. Bearings are in. We're gonna get the motor lined up. Now, why I set it up this way instead of setting up the boring bar like we did with the bearings on either end?
Too complicated. The motor is in the way. We'd have to take the motor out. We'd have to make new stuff to hold the bearing blocks in place. By the time we did all that, we can have this done.